What I love about the world of literature is that it's about empathy. In order to read a book of fiction, you have to exercise empathy. And what empathy is something that is declining in our society right now, partially because we kind of isolate ourselves. You know, we do so much behind the computer and we line everything up and kind of narrow our focus. And if we're really smart about our internet use, and by the way, everybody in this room is really smart, we know how to go to the exact channels and the exact newspapers and the exact things, get the news information on the internet that already completely agrees with what we already believe. And that's really good for our egos because it makes us feel, you know, supported. It's not good for our society. Our society is based on the idea of civil discourse, on the ability to agree to disagree. We can hold opposite opinions, we can talk it out, we can maybe come a little bit, you come a little bit this way, I come a little bit this way, okay, maybe we agree not to do that. Maybe we suddenly have a wonderful new understanding of the world. Whatever happens, we don't have to come to blows over it, right? That's empathy. The idea of understanding that I can understand that you may have a different set of life values than I do. I respect you, please respect me. Okay, then we move forward as a society. If we don't have that dialogue, we don't move forward as a society. So I really emphasize the place where a lot of this conversation happens, I believe, is in our bookstores and in our libraries and in our classrooms. I mean, teachers are the best, and you guys probably have some really wonderful teachers at this school. Respect them and don't take their value lightly, really. It's really wonderful to see a well-orchestrated class discussion where people have differing opinions and yet we can talk it out and at the end come to some kind of resolution. So please support your libraries, please support your bookstores, and the students out there, please support and respect the education that you're getting. The education you get is what you put into it. And your teachers, the more you put in, the more your teachers are going to see how excited you are and then how excited they're going to get, and they're going to help you get even more out of it. So please, honor thy teachers. That's the end of my lecture. That's easy, right? No. I just feel it's important to do. I have 3 kids myself. I have a 19-year-old, a 17-year-old, and a 9-year-old. And so I got a kid in college and one a junior in high school and then a 3rd grader. So I do see this, I've seen it for a while, and I just always like to say something about it, especially when I'm talking to young, eager minds. I grew up in Seattle, Washington. It's pretty far away from here. The other most popular joke I've been getting is, well, you must feel right at home because it's raining, and it rains a lot in Seattle. No, actually, when I left Seattle a couple of days ago, it was 81 degrees and bright blue sky. So no, this does not remind me of Seattle at all. I grew up in Seattle, and when I graduated from high school, I wanted to get as far away from Seattle as I possibly could. Now, it was 1983, and so I went to school at Columbia University in New York City. It's not physically as far away as possible, but it's culturally pretty far away, especially in 1983. I lived in New York for 18 years. While I was there, I did all sorts of different kinds of jobs, but mostly, for the most part, my thrust was making documentary films. And then my family and I moved back to Seattle in 2001, where now we live, and we love it there. While I was in New York making documentaries, a film came across my desk at some point. A friend of mine had wanted me to take a look at it. They were looking for a US distributor, and maybe I could make a connection for them or something. It was a film called State of Dogs, and it was made in Mongolia. And it was about the belief among the nomadic people of Mongolia that the next incarnation for their dog will be as a person. So it was kind of this really magical film, very lovely, and I really enjoyed watching it. I couldn't get involved for a number of reasons, but the idea stuck with me, this idea that a dog would come back as a person. I thought, one day I'm going to do something with that, but I had no idea what. Years passed. We had moved to Seattle. I was at a poetry reading for the poet Billy Collins. Billy Collins, a terrific poet. He was the National Poet Laureate a few years ago. Really a great guy, and if you have a chance to see him in person, I encourage you to do so. He's very funny, got a nice deadpan delivery, and his poems always have a good twist to them. He was reading one of his poems that night in this packed theater in downtown Seattle, and the poem is called The Revenant, which means words from the dead. So it's a poem that's told from the perspective of a dog who's recently been euthanized. It's being narrated from doggy heaven. And the first line of the poem is this: I am the dog you put to sleep, as you like to call the needle of oblivion. Come back to tell you this simple thing: I never liked you. Right? It's funny. It's very funny, and it goes on, and there's a nice poignant twist at the end and all that. But everybody in this audience just was laughing hysterically at this idea of a dead dog like berating his former master for like, oh, the jangling of my chain drove me mad and all this kind of stuff. And that's the moment that a light bulb went off in my head. I said, that idea about a dog being reincarnated as a person, I can tell that story, but I have to tell it from the dog's point of view. And the dog's got to have a real attitude, you know? Like, I'm smarter than everybody else in this room, but no one listens to me because my tongue is too floppy to form words, and I can't go wherever I want to go because I don't have any thumbs. I can't turn doorknobs. Other than that, I would be better than everybody here. So the idea then of Enzo was born. This is in the summer of 2006. And I remember thinking, this is great, this idea about a dog narrating a book. I love it. In the summer of 2006, I was doing a lot of promoting for my second book. The Art of Racing in the Rain yes, it is true, it's the first book that anyone ever cared about, but it actually was my third book that I wrote. I was out promoting my second book, How Evan Broke His Head and Other Secrets, available at all fine bookstores. And I was going around doing readings. I was doing readings for 2 or 3 people at a time, you know, throughout the Northwest, Oregon, Montana, Idaho, Washington. I even went up to Alaska to do some readings. Just trying to, I needed to meet the booksellers, I needed to meet the librarians, needed to, you know, build my brand. It's what you do when you're an unknown writer. You have to do the marketing part of it. So I would drive around all these places and do these readings and carry a box of books in my trunk because sometimes the bookstore didn't have them, that kind of thing. And I was spending a lot of time on the road. At some point, my wife took me aside and said, so I see what you're doing. I think it's important work, you know, you're going out there and building these relationships. I get that. She said, and I know that you're doing readings at night because I can see it in I'm tracking you on the internet and I can see that you're doing these readings. She said, I just wonder, what do you do all day? Because you're doing events at night. What do you do? How do you spend your days? Because I think you're going to see the movies, which was exactly what I was doing. I still don't know if she had found a ticket stub in my pocket or something, but she figured it out. I had my two older boys were younger then, and I would go, they were maybe 5 and 7, and so I would go down to whatever town there was in Oregon, you know, Salem, Oregon, for instance, and I would check into a hotel, and I'd go for a jog by the river, because all towns have a river, and then I'd clean up, and I'd get a light lunch, and I'd go to the local Cineplex, and I'd watch R-rated movies. My kids were too young. And so I would watch the movies, and then I'd go do my event in the evening, and then I'd pack up my bag and drive to the next town and repeat. It was kind of a cushy life, actually. And my wife said, you know, that's not going to happen anymore. She said, because you're gallivanting all around everywhere, having free time, and I'm staying home taking care of the kids. No, she said, from now on, you need to take your laptop with you on these trips, and you need to be writing in the hotel room during your afternoons. I want to see pages when I get back. And she started giving me page counts depending on how many days I would be away. She'd be like, I want to see 12 pages. So at this point, I have to introduce you to my wife. She's not here. She's at home with the kids. I have to introduce you to the idea of my wife. Any writer will tell you that his or her spouse or partner is the most important fundamental relationship. My wife is my first reader. She's my best editor. She's my most reliable voice. She's really good at certain things that she can put her finger on and say, no, you need to do this. And she's always right about that sort of stuff. She's really valuable to me in the writing process, but also as a support help. You know, she's there with me to celebrate when things are going well, and she's there with me to commiserate when things aren't going so well. I dare say my wife is my muse. Before you get all gooey on the muse thing, she's not like a muse that you would see in a Renaissance painting, you know, like with the long flowing gown and the little gold laurel thing and the wings, and she doesn't like float over my keyboard sprinkling pixie dust on it. If you want to think of my wife as muse, you got to kind of go to the dark side, you know, S&M dominatrix muse, you know, black leather, riding crop, the whole thing. Get back in your office and don't come out until you finish that chapter. Like that kind of muse, right? So you get it? So imagine, the summer of 2006, I'm working on a book, halfway through it, but I'm kind of struggling with it. It doesn't feel right to me. I have this idea to start a new book told from the point of view of a dog, and I say to my wife, I'm going down to Central Oregon to do like 5 days of readings and stuff, and I said to my wife, I'm going to start this new dog book, and she said what any good dominatrix muse would say. She said, no, that's not what you're not going to do that. You're going to finish the book you're working on, sell it, then you can start the dog book. That's how the system works. And I said, but it's not working. And I begged, I whined, I begged, I pleaded. And finally she said, all right, fine. You want to start the dog book? You can start the dog book, but I want to see 40 pages when you get back, which is a lot of pages, by the way. So I drove down to Central Oregon, checked into my hotel, the Riverside Lodge, and I opened up my laptop and I said, doggy, you better be ready. And the first sentence came to me, gestures are all that I have. Sometimes they must be grand in nature. And I thought, I've got this. And I wrote for 4 months. After 4 months, I had finished the first draft of The Art of Racing in the Rain. Never written that fast before, it just kind of came. Beginning of November 2006, I was really excited. I sent my manuscript off to my agent in New York, and I waited patiently for him to call. He didn't call, he didn't call, he didn't call. Finally, he called, and I remember exactly the date. It was the Tuesday before Thanksgiving in 2006. I remember this day so clearly because my wife is from New York. I met her in New York, and she's from there. Her family is all still in New York. And her parents were coming out to visit us in Seattle for their first Thanksgiving in Seattle. It was a big deal because I had stolen their daughter and granddaughter and grandchildren away from them. And now they're coming out for the celebration. I felt there was a lot of pressure on me that they could see that my wife and my children were thriving in the Seattle environment. And also I do all the cooking in the house for the most part, and I was due the Thanksgiving, and I had to produce a really good Thanksgiving dinner for my mother-in-law to impress her. And I was walking toward the Whole Foods that Tuesday morning. They were coming in later on that night. I was going to the Whole Foods to pick up my Heidi organic game hen. Nothing is too good for my mother-in-law. And I just as I was getting up to the front, my cell phone rang, and it was my agent. Perfect, I said. Now he's going to tell me how brilliant I am, and I can add that fuel to the Garth fire that I'm going to share with and just impress my in-laws with. So I answered the phone, and I said, what'd you think? And my agent said, it's narrated by a dog. And I said, yes, I actually wrote it. I already know that. What'd you think of the book? And he said, I can't sell a book narrated by a dog. No one will read a book narrated by a dog. No publisher will publish a book narrated by a dog. No marketing department would know how to market a book narrated by a dog. It's not even narrated by a dog, he said. It's narrated by an author pretending to be a dog. To which I said, Victor Hugo wasn't a hunchback. All right. So Victor Hugo is this French dude. And he wrote this guy, Quasimodo, and does this ring a bell with anybody? That's okay. My agent didn't get the joke either. It's maybe that comes like in the later semester English class. He didn't laugh. My agent totally didn't laugh. I thought it was a clever joke, but he didn't think it was funny. And he just went on this huge, long diatribe about everything I was doing wrong. The state of the industry and the state of fiction, and this was my third book, and my first two hadn't sold very well. So this book was really important. He said it was a gimmick and not even a good one. I was throwing away my career and worse, taking him down with me. And he ended up this giant diatribe by saying, just do me a favor, take this book and throw it away, and go write me something I can sell. And I don't know, it was the holiday spirit, something came over me, and I channeled my inner Donald Trump, and I said, you're fired. So I fired my agent. A little bit of advice, if I have any writers in the audience. If you're working on your third novel, and your first two maybe got nice reviews, maybe even won an award or two, but didn't sell a whole lot of copies, and you're working on your third novel, and let's say it's told from an alternative point of view, you know, like maybe it's narrated by a dog or something, and let's say you're going to get in a fight with your agent over that, and you're going to fire your agent, and it's the Tuesday before Thanksgiving when your in-laws are coming into town for a great big Thanksgiving feast, it's best not to tell your spouse about that until after Thanksgiving. Little thing I picked up on the road. We got through the weekend okay. My mother-in-law was suitably impressed, and the following Monday I immediately started sending my manuscript out to agents to find a new agent. And they all said the exact same thing. They said, we like the writing, we like the idea, but it's narrated by a dog. We don't know how to sell this book. We don't know how to handle this book. And I didn't know what to do. I was kind of at the end of my rope. In the spring, maybe April 2007, I was at a fundraiser for King County Library Systems out in the Northwest. They do a big gala every spring. They get local writers. It's called Literary Lions, and they have 35 writers and 35 tables, and it's a big dinner, jacket and tie and all that. And the writers move from table to table to table, and they get to meet. It's a very fun event. I do it whenever I'm in town. And I was doing it that year in 2007. I was at the pre-author dinner, sitting with other writers who I didn't know, so we were going around the table introducing ourselves. And I got to me and I said, hi, my name is Garth, and I'm really frustrated because I've got this book and I think it's really good, but it's narrated by a dog and no agent will touch it. And this other writer sitting across the table from me looked up from his plate and he said, oh, you should talk to my agent. He sold my book and it's narrated by a crow. This is a true story. His name is Lane Mayhew. He wrote a book called Song of the Crow, about a crow who stows away on Noah's Ark. So I got his agent's information, and I sent him my pages the following Monday, and 2 days later he called me up, and he was crying. And he said, I love this dog, I love this story, you have to let me represent it. And so he had some good ideas to improve it. We worked on it a little bit, and then he sent it out. 50 weeks, so just less than a year after I started writing it, that summer day in Bend, Oregon, my agent sold it to my great publisher, Harper, and then it went on to 4 years on the New York Times bestseller list and millions of copies, 35 languages. They did a play of it in Seattle. Universal's making it into a movie, supposedly. So it does prove, I guess, the moral of the story is that people will read a book narrated by a dog. But I think more to the moral of the story is maybe that if we truly believe something in our heart, when we're deciding what we're going to do with our careers, for instance, and we think we know what resonates with us, we cannot let some naysayer dissuade us from it. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy, and it doesn't mean it won't entail sacrifices. But we do have to, if we set aside our own goals and our own possible happiness because someone says, oh, you can't do that, well, then you have only yourself to blame for not being happy, for not achieving that thing. So when you're making your decisions, to my students, speaking to my students here, when you are making your decisions about, I know you have a lot of decisions in the next few years, and you're going to have to figure out which way to go and all that. Everybody around you probably seems to know what's best for you, right? Your parents know what's best for you, siblings know what's best for you, guidance counselors, teachers, friends, Uncle Bob. Everybody knows what's best for you. My only words of advice are, Uncle Bob already screwed up his life. He doesn't get to screw up your life too. So make the decisions that are good for you, not for Uncle Bob, as much as that might make him happy, because you have to live with the decisions that you make about yourself. So, what should we do? You know what, I want to tell you a little bit about A Sudden Light, and then I want to read a little passage, and then we'll just go to questions if that's... How many people have read The Art of Racing in the Rain? Oh, okay, good. So, that's why we're here. Let me just tell you a little bit about, I have these postcards, I'll have them out when I'm doing signing. What do you do after The Art of Racing in the Rain? My publisher wanted me to write a book, told from the point of view of a cat, whose master was a small planes pilot, and the cat was obsessed with trying to learn how to fly. You can imagine, but I couldn't do that. I felt that I needed to tell the stories that I need to tell. For me, The Art of Racing in the Rain it is not a dog book for me. Now, that doesn't mean that people who love dogs don't, and it's good that I like that people love dogs, love the book, that's great. But for me, it's a book about a nearly human soul trapped in a dog's body, and he's highly conflicted, the character of Enzo, right? He wants two things that are mutually exclusive. He is convinced he's going to be reincarnated as a person, so he wants to hurry up onto his next life so he can get his tongue and his thumbs that he desires so much. And yet he also loves his family so much he doesn't want to leave them. So in that conflict makes a good character. So for me, that's what it's about. I never really thought too much about the dog aspect of it. People have asked me, did I study dog behavior to know? It's like, no, I mean, I've always had a dog, but I didn't, eat out of a dog bowl to know what that was like or anything. I mean, it just didn't seem reasonable, especially because Enzo, if he had his choice, would not be eating out of a dog bowl. So I needed to write what was next in my kind of mind, not what was next for the market. It's not my job to write what I think people want. My job is to write what I feel passionate about, and hopefully readers will pick up on that passion and enjoy it. So I went back to an idea that I was working with before I wrote The Art of Racing in the Rain. I had written a play back in 2005 called Brother Jones. I had one production in Los Angeles. It was very fun. It was great to see it being put up on stage. It had a fundamental flaw to it, though. The idea when I started it was I wanted to do this American Gothic and have a big old one set and have it a big creepy old haunted house that creaked and groaned and was a character in the play and made strategic sounds throughout the play. And then a dysfunctional family living within that once was a very wealthy timber baron family, since fallen from grace, and all they have left is this gigantic decrepit mansion, which may or may not be haunted. They don't even have the money to keep this thing up. So how did this family get to that place? What I love about theater is that it's about the immediacy of the drama. You see it play out in front of you on the stage, and so you're really with it. What I love about a novel is that you can trace back and go into how we got to the now, the history of how we got to the now. So that's what I did with my new book, A Sudden Light. It traces the history of 5 generations of a timber baron family, the Riddell family, and it goes back, it starts in the 1890s in Portland, Oregon, and tracks this family as it moves forward northward through Grays Harbor and Aberdeen, over to Shelton, Tacoma, et cetera, up into Seattle. And it involves, it's a bit of a ghost story. I say a bit of a ghost story because it's not scary. It's a spiritual ghost story. It's not The Haunting of Hill House. It's different. It's about sort of how the tentacles of our souls travel. This is one life. Our temporal being is only one aspect of who we are, and that there are other aspects if we're open to seeing those things. So we did a website just for the book, because the book is pretty big, but I did a ton of research and stuff, and you can go to different areas on the website and hover over the different buildings of this North Estate, it's called, this big estate where this family lives, and get pop-down menus and get more information about certain things in history if you're interested. There's a lot of John Muir in there. There's a lot of the Transcendentalists. I'm sure we all are studying Transcendentalism. Yes, yay, woo! Henry David Thoreau, little Emerson, Ralph Waldo, good old Ralphie. Yeah, so there's that kind of stuff. There's the history of the Northwest, which I kind of am fascinated with because I grew up there. You may not be so fascinated, maybe. So check out A Sudden Light if you care. 2. I'm just going to read you a quick passage, and then we'll get going. I'm not even going to introduce. This is from The Art of Racing in the Rain. I'm not even going to introduce this, except to say that it takes place at a little racetrack in Northern California. Then he told me to get in the front seat of his car and sit, which I did. They wrapped the bed sheet over me, pressing me to the seat, leaving only my head sticking out. They somehow secured the sheet tightly from behind. Too tight, Denny asked. I was too excited to reply. He was going to take me out in his car. Denny walked around to the driver's side. He took his helmet out of the back seat and squeezed it onto his head. He got in the car and put on his seatbelt. 1 bark means slower, 2 means faster. Got it? I barked twice. The paddock at Thunderhill Raceway Park is tucked between 2 long parallel straights. The rest of the course fans out from the paddock area like butterfly wings. We cruised very slowly through the hot pit area and to the track entrance. We're going to take it easy, Denny said, and off we went. Being on a track was a new experience for me. No buildings, no signs, no sense of proportion. It was like running through a field, gliding over a plain. Denny shifted smoothly, but I noticed he drove more aggressively than he did on the street. He revved the car much higher, and his braking was much harder. I'm finding my visuals, he explained to me. Turn-in points, braking. Some guys drive more by feel. They get in a rhythm and trust it, but I'm very visual. Around the turns we went. He noted his apexes and exits for my benefit. Down the straights, we picked up speed. We weren't going very fast, maybe 60, but I really felt the speed around the turns when the tires made a hollow, ghostly sound, almost like an owl. I felt special being with Denny on the racetrack. He had never taken me out on the track before. I felt sure and relaxed. Being held firmly to the seat was comforting. The windows were open and the wind was fresh and cold. I could have driven like that all day. After 3 laps, he looked over at me. Brakes are warm, he said. Tires are warm. I didn't understand what he was getting at. You want to try a hot lap? A hot lap? I barked twice. Denny laughed. Sing out if you don't like it, he said. One long howl. He firmly pressed the accelerator to the floor. There was nothing like it. The sensation of speed, nothing in the world can compare. It was the sudden acceleration, not Jim's bedsheet, that kept me pinned to the seat as we gathered speed and flew down the first straight. Hold on now, Denny said. We're taking this at speed. Fast we went, hurtling faster. I watched the turn approach, scream at us until we were practically past it, and then he was off the accelerator and hard on the brakes. The nose of the car dove, and then I was thankful for the sheet, because without it, I would have been thrown against the windshield. Slow, 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 the brake pads held the rotors as tightly as they could, burning from the friction, the heat being thrown off the calipers, the energy dissipating, and then he cranked the wheel left and so smoothly but without pause, he was back on the gas and we were pushing through the turn. The G-forces shoving us toward the outside of the track, but the tires holding us in place. They were not hooting, those tires. No, the hour was dead. The tires were screeching. They were shouting, howling, crying in pain. He relaxed on the wheel at the apex and the car drifted toward the exit and he was full on the gas and we flew out of that turn and toward the next and the next after that. 15 turns at Thunder Hill. 15. And I love them all equally. I adore them all. Each one is different, each with its own particular sensation, but each so magnificent. Around the track we went faster and faster, lap after lap. You okay? Then he asked, looking over at me as we sped nearly 120 miles per hour down the back straight, and I barked twice. I'm going to use up my tires if you keep me out here, he said. One more lap. Yes, one more lap. One more lap, forever one more lap. I live my life for one more lap. I give my life for one more lap. Please, God, give me one more lap. And that lap was spectacular. I lifted my eyes as Denny instructed. Big eyes, far eyes, he said to me. Those reference points, the visuals he had identified when we walked the track, moved by so quickly it took me some time to realize he was not even seeing them. He was living them. He had programmed the map of the racecourse into his brain. With every breath, he adjusted, he reassessed, he corrected, but he did it all subconsciously. I saw then how in a race he could plot now to pass another driver 3 or 4 laps later. His thinking, his strategies, his mind, all of Denny unfolded for me that day. After a cool-down lap, we pulled into the paddock and the entire crew was waiting. They surrounded the car and their hands released me from my harness and I leapt to the tarmac. Did you like it? One of them asked me, and I barked. Yes, I barked and jumped high in the air. You were hauling ass out there, Pat said to Denny. We've got a real racer on the set. Well, Denny said with a laugh. Enzo barked twice. They all laughed and I barked twice again, faster. The feeling, the sensation, the movement, the speed, the car, the tires, the sound, the wind, the track surface, the apex, the exit, the shift point, the braking zone, the ride. It's all about the ride. There is nothing more to tell about that trip because nothing more could possibly be more incredible than those few hot laps that Denny gave to me. Until that moment, I thought that I loved racing. I intellectualized that I would enjoy being in a race car. Until that moment, I didn't know. How can anyone know until he sits in a car at race speeds and takes turns at the limits of adhesion, brakes a hair from lockup, the engine begging for the red line? I floated through the rest of our trip. I dreamed of going out again at speed, but I suspected, as it turned out correctly so, that more track time for me was unlikely. Still, I had my memory, my experience I could relive in my mind again and again. 2 barks means faster. Sometimes, to this day, in my sleep I bark twice, because I am dreaming of Denny driving me around Thunder Hill, the 2 of us laying down a hot lap, And I bark twice to say, faster. One more lap, Denny, faster. Thanks. Thank you. I open the floor to questions. If you have questions, if you don't, I will make them up for you. Anybody? All right. Oh.
I just think of my dog. She loves to stick her head out the window, and you just see all that hair flying back, and they're just in their glory. I just related to that so much.
Dogs do like cars. Well, we all like cars. Cars are great. Yes?
When Enzo could smell the cancer in the wife's head,
Yep.
how did you know what cancer smelled like?
Well, I don't actually know what cancer smells like, but I know about dogs being able to do this. It first was introduced to me many, many years ago, because they've been doing this for years. The question was about Enzo being able to smell Eve's cancer. My sister grew up with a severe form of epilepsy. And so I've learned a lot about epilepsy over the years. And when I was, I guess in high school, maybe in college, I remember reading some articles about dogs who can smell a seizure that's coming. There's a change in the chemical state of your brain. Some people who have epilepsy will experience an aura before they have their seizure. It's sort of this warning signal, and they learn to recognize it and then say, okay, I better, get to somebody who can help me, or sit down, or in some way pull over if you're in a car or something like this. Some people do not have an aura, but their brain still gives off this chemical secretion, and so dogs can be trained to smell that and be an aid dog for someone with epilepsy and get that person to help before a seizure happens. And then I started doing research into that and saying, that's interesting that dogs, how would you teach that? I mean, on and on. And then the more research I did, the more I realized that they've trained dogs to do all sorts of things. Dogs can smell skin cancer. Dogs can smell lung cancer by your breath. And dogs can smell inner ear, through the sinuses. They can smell tumors. So this is a real thing that happens, and so having known about it, I gave Enzo that. I guess in some way that's one of his superpowers. He didn't get thumbs, and his tongue doesn't form words, but he can smell a tumor. Anybody else? Yes.
Okay, so how did you come to associate the demon inside of us with the stuffed zebra?
The question about the zebra. There's a question about the zebra. There's always a question about the zebra. I don't talk about the zebra. No, I'm kidding. The question is, how did the zebra sort of motif come to be? As a writer, this is a confession, and some writers will tell you they know absolutely everything they do. They're lying. Sometimes things just happen for a reason, a serendipitous reason. I kind of ascribe it to sort of the creativity coming from outside of us. That my job as a writer is to sort of start the story, but then the story starts telling me what it's going to be about, and I need to follow and listen closely to what the story wants to be. One day when I was working on the book, sometimes I'll give myself an assignment when I'm writing a book, and I'll grant myself permission to write for the day and say, no one's ever going to read it. It's important to do that because we put a lot of pressure on ourselves as writers to kind of produce gold, and not everything is gold. You got to get through a lot of ore and a lot of rock to get to the gold. And so sometimes when we start writing something, our ego gets involved with it, and we want to keep it. We say, oh, it must be good because I wrote it, right? But it isn't, or it doesn't belong in the story, and we have to train ourselves to be able to divorce our ego from it. So to help myself in that process, I give myself an assignment, for instance. I'll go in and say, I'm going to start writing something. It's not on my outline. It's not on my notes. I'm just going to try something, and I give myself permission to throw it away at the end of the day. I went into work one day, and I gave myself an assignment. I said, I need to know more about Enzo and what makes him tick and what he's like in stressful situations. So I'm going to contrive to have him locked in the house for 3 days. Denny's going to be at a race, and Eve is going to have one of her bad headaches, and she's going to run out with Zoe, and she's going to forget about Enzo. And he's going to be stuck there, and he's going to have to, how is he going to survive? Go. So I started writing the scene. And, I thought, well, what happens? Well, I've had dogs all my life. I know that if a dog is left long enough alone in a house, something's going to get destroyed. So what happens? He gets locked in the house. The first thing he does is discover the toilet bowls so he can drink water. He won't dehydrate, right? But he's not got any food, and he can't get to any food. And if you go 3 days without food, even a dog, maybe you start to hallucinate a little bit. Maybe things start getting a little wacky. And so then I was like, now if he hallucinates, then what happens? And so I created this whole scene where these stuffed animals come to life. And in fact, it's toned way down in the book. It was like way more over the top when I wrote the first draft of this. I mean, it was, they had created a jungle gym out of Tinker Toys, and they were doing like trapeze stuff and all these sorts of dance routines and stuff. And my editor called me up at some point and she said, Garth, we love Enzo. He's the smartest dog, and we all wish we could be Enzo. And we know he has great insight into everything, and he knows all his favorite movies. Garth, Enzo does not know who Bob Fosse is. He's a famous choreographer, for those who don't know who Bob Fosse is. So she made me cut out the Bob Fosse references to All That Jazz, the great movie with Roy Scheider. Well, Enzo, I said he does know who Bob Fosse is because he saw All That Jazz one Saturday afternoon on Cinemax. And she's like, no, he really did. You have to cut that part out. So she was right, of course. But so then I wrote this scene. And he destroys the stuffed animals. But of course, Enzo would never do anything to hurt Zoe or his family, right? So he has to invent a reason, some external force to blame the damage on. And so that's where the zebra came from. People often ask me, why a zebra instead of like, I don't know, a lion or a polar bear or something? And my answer to that is really, really simple. It's my book. If you wanted a lion or a polar bear to be the demon, then you get to write your own book, and you can knock yourself out on that. But I have a thing with zebras. I don't trust zebras. I mean, they seem awfully duplicitous to me. Are they black with white stripes or white with black stripes? And they're kind of misshapen. They're not really. Are they horses or mules? What are they? And in Madagascar too, Chris Rock, the zebra. He doesn't even like the zebras. They all start like imitating him, and he's like, stop. Anyway, so I wrote the chapter, and I was like, I read it over, and I thought, oh wait, this is good. And this idea of externalizing responsibility fits right in with the theme of the book. And so I took the zebra then and kept him, and then brought him back as a motif several times, and it really is a fundamental. Figures into the climax, or into Enzo's climax of the book, right? He sees the zebra again and realizes, has his epiphany, the demon is us. That what we do in our lives a lot is externalize responsibility for our actions. It's easy to do. You blame someone else. You made me. I wouldn't have said that if you hadn't. Well, and then because you did that, I had to do this. No, we have to own it. You don't have to do anything, and no one makes you do anything. Everything we do is by choice. And if we are so weak that we can only blame our actions as being reactions, then we are always going to be the victim in what we do. And that's totally what the theme of the book is, right? It's totally the way it is on a racetrack. In a racetrack, when you go racing, amateur race car driving, I never did professional stuff, but amateur SCCA, Sports Car Club of America, I'm sure you got plenty of nice race tracks around here to go to. It's a lot of fun, and I love doing it. The first time you go to the racetrack, they sit you down. The chief steward sits you down in the trailer and gives you the speech. First of all, you're a novice, he says. You're going to wear a big orange square on the back of your car so everyone knows to stay away from you, right? And then he said, here's the deal. No one asked you to come here. You came here voluntarily. This is your choice. And everything that happens, any damage that happens to your car is your responsibility, and any damage that happens to somebody else's car is that person's responsibility. It doesn't matter whose fault it is. Otherwise, if we started adjudicating blame on this sort of stuff, we'd be here all day, we would get no racing done. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. The famous NASCAR saying is, I don't care if you get hit by a bolt of lightning on the back straight at Daytona, you shouldn't have been where the lightning wanted to strike. That's the mentality you have to have in order to get some racing done. If you have that as your mandate, guess what? You drive differently because you don't want to have to pay for damage to your car, even if it's someone else's fault. If you know that car number 13 gets squirrely in turn 2, don't pass car number 13 in turn 2. Wait for turn 5 or wait for a straight, get a run. That's the smart way to race so we all can finish the day. And you can't, as they say, to finish first you must finish. If you get collected, even if it's not your fault, you're still standing with the turn workers. I've stood with turn workers for an entire race before because my car was stuck in the gravel. It sucks. It's horrible. I'm not there to I love turn workers, but I don't want to watch from the turn station. I want to be in the car. So if we had this rule, guess what? It's easy enough to say that at the racetrack. Enzo can take that concept and bring it to the real world, which we, for some reason, as people, can't seem to do. When you're driving around out here outside Owensboro, I bet, tell me, everybody's teaching people lessons, aren't they? Right? You cut me off, now I'm going to cut you off. We call it road rage. Maybe if it's not too aggressive, we call it road anger. But everybody's teaching people lessons with their cars. You know why they're teaching people a lesson with their cars? Because they don't have to pay for the damage, because they have insurance. If we did not have car insurance, guess what? You wouldn't be teaching people lessons. If the rule out there in Owensboro streets was, you pay for your damage, that guy's going to pay for his damage, you would drive a lot differently. You just would. Now, our society is not built like that, but that doesn't mean that we can't have that as a personal ethic. Just because our society has to build in liability insurance and indemnification for people who really aren't, sometimes, people aren't functioning on the highest level, right? So we have to have a policing ability to do that. But we as our personal ethic can be different. We can't, just because we can have that in our mind to say, you know what, that person cut me off, must be having a bad day. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm feeling angry, I'm just going to pull over for a minute. And while I do, I'll do the responsible thing, and I'll check my phone then when I'm pulled over and stopped on the side, not while I'm driving. Okay, now I feel better, now I pull back out. Then we're good people, right? So that was off. I write novels, not haikus. Sorry. Yes, sir.
I have a question. I believe you said the manuscript to 20 more agents, is that correct?
I don't think it was 20, but it was many.
Did you ever come to a point when you felt like perhaps they were right and I'm wrong and I'm going to lay it aside and maybe move on to something else? Or how did you feel about that?
I did come to, did I come to the point, did I ever come to the brink of despair is the question. I was flirting with the brink. I was at the edge of the precipice peering over into the abyss when I had my break. So sometimes crisis maybe brings things out. I don't know. I mean, in retrospect, it makes perfect sense that I would have to go through this sort of ordeal. It's not that big of an ordeal. I mean, considering what people have to go through in their lives, it's not the But still, to get the story of Enzo, which was about perseverance, is right. That's what Denny's has to be about. Denny's gotta. It doesn't matter what happens. He's gonna go. So it makes sense that I would have to endure this little bit of a challenge and persevere through it without doubting myself. I think we always have self-doubt. We need to build confidence if possible, but it's also good to have support around us. For me, as I say, my wife was my big partner, and I talked it over with her. I said, "Do you think this is really? I should look for something else to do, or I should set this aside and write something else, or should I look into whatever self-publishing options there are?" There were options in 2005, but not many, not like it is now. And she said, "No, you have to you got to work harder to make it happen." Something good did come out of it, I guess. If you like the ending, if you like the epilogue, something good came out of this challenge with the agent thing. I had sent it to one agent. We had a long flirtation. I thought he was going to take it. He agented a different book from many years back that was told from the point of view of a dead girl in heaven about her. She was murdered, and so I thought, well, if he can do that from heaven, a girl from heaven telling about her life and her family and all that, he might be able to believe a dog could narrate a book. And he had ultimately turned it down. But when he did, then I was really, what am I doing wrong? Why is nobody getting this? And I said, well, let me just think about it for a second. Maybe it's because no one believes that dogs can have human-like thoughts. Okay, let's let's assume that's the problem. What could I do to solve that? I could have Enzo already dead. I could have Enzo in doggy heaven. He's a doggy angel remembering his past life, waiting in the queue for his new body, right? For his reincarnation. And so he's up in heaven kicking back and reflecting. And a dog angel, no one can tell me a dog angel doesn't have human-like thoughts. You just can't do it with any sort of authority. I'm sorry. I can always make the case that the dog angel has human-like thoughts. And so I said, okay, how would that end, though? It would end with him getting the new body, right? So I said, so what does that look like? So I wrote this last chapter, kind of on a whim. I just said, look, and that turned into the epilogue. And then I said, okay, this is going to work. I went back to the beginning and I started converting it all to doggy heaven. And I got through 3 chapters of having Enzo be a dog angel. And I read it over and I said, this really sucks. I'm putting it back the way it was, but I'm going to keep that last chapter because I liked that. So, something good did come out of the agent thing. Yes?
You seem like a very spiritual and deep person. I was kind of wondering what books do you read, books that pertain to that, and what are they?
Yeah, well, what kinds of things do I read? Yeah, for sure. A lot of what I read for blurb. So I'm reading books before they're coming out to endorse them and stuff like that. And that's sort of a business obligation that I have. Personally, if you like sort of a touch of magical realism, I'm really encourage you to take a look at Carlos Ruiz Zafón. He's a Spanish writer, Barcelona. Is where he lives, and he wrote, he's written young adult stuff, but he wrote a trilogy, a set of 3 books. They don't have to be read in any order for adults, and they're really fantastic. It's Prisoner of Heaven, Angel's Game, and Shadow of the Wind. And they're all set in Barcelona in the 50s, in the Franco era. And so there's historical fiction, history in there, the idea of what was going on with the dictatorship, and there's some pretty nasty stuff happening in that era. And what I love about it is that the city of Barcelona is really, if you've ever been there, you would recognize all locations of Guelph Park and all that really cool architecture, the Gaudi architecture and everything. If you haven't been there, read this, and then there's in the back of one of the books, there's a walking tour you can take. So when you do go to Barcelona, and everyone should go once in their life, take the map and you can go and track down all the locations. And it's also got a bit of magical realism in that one of the plot points is the Cemetery of Forgotten Books, which is this depository of millions of volumes of books that people have forgotten about. But if you know the gatekeeper, you can get in and you can find these books. So I would encourage you to take a look at those. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am?
What inspired you to become a writer?
What inspired me to become a writer? I don't know. I can't really do anything else is the problem. And, I always wanted to be a writer, a storyteller, probably family history. I grew up hearing stories. My mother's side of the family is Irish and Tlingit Indian from southeastern Alaska. She had 9 brothers and sisters, and they were always telling stories around the campfire and stuff. So I always heard the whole oral tradition and all that. My mother wrote short stories for children when she was young, had a couple of them published, but not many. She was sort of a frustrated writer, but I always saw her behind the typewriter, so maybe that was part of it. When I got to college, I majored in English, and I saw that college was running out, and I figured out, now what do I do? So I do what any good English major does. I went to grad school. I thought it's irresponsible to say I'm a novelist at that point, because the starting salary for a novelist is 0, and there are no health benefits or anything. So I went to grad school for film, and figuring I would study screenwriting, and the screenwriters supposedly get paid. I had an allergic reaction to screenwriting. I don't like it. I didn't like it then. I don't like it now. Some people are great at it. I'm not. And I got pretty frustrated with that. And fortunately, there was a documentary film editor who was teaching in the program by the name of Jeff Bartz. He edited some of the great documentaries from the cinema verite era, the golden age of documentary filmmaking. And he saw that I was struggling, and he said, come into the editing suite and let me teach you how to tell a story using found objects, which is what I needed. a documentary film still has to, a nonfiction film still has, or nonfiction story still has to have the elements that we know, the important dramatic elements that we know are the basis of drama. Whether or not they're in proper order is not the issue. It's we need to have those 5 elements in any drama, and we know these 5 elements because we've all taken our English classes, haven't we? And we've read our Shakespeare. Yes, 5 things. Shakespeare. Yes. Situation at rise. Right. Remember that, and then exciting incident, exciting accident, as I say to the 4th graders. Inciting incident. Something happens to take us in a new direction. Right, and then developing action, and then crisis, climax, and then denouement, or resolution. We need to have those 5 elements, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. In nonfiction, in a documentary film, you need to have a character or an issue or something that people care about. That they want. That there's something's happening now. There's a complication. Somebody wants something. There's obstacles. There's conflict. You can't have drama without conflict, right? And then we see how the obstacles are overcome, and then we have our big explosion of what's going to happen. And then, in the classic days of old Greek theater, if our hero gets the goal, then it's a comedy, and if the hero doesn't get the goal, gosh, it's a tragedy. But we've messed with that nuance a little bit. Anyway, so that's when I'd made documentary films for about 9 years. Had a great time doing it. Was working on a film. Had a grant to do a film on these 2 homeless rap musicians in Brooklyn. That was fun. Marty G and Concrete, they were great. Pretty wild times back in the 90s, and I ran out of money. And I said, now I have to stop everything to raise more money to make this film. That's not the way it should be. I want to do something where no one can stop me from doing it. And so that's when I started writing my first book, Raven Stole the Moon. And then I was like, okay, now I was done. You know, if you want to go into something like writing, I really believe you have to live life a lot first. You know, you have to have something to write about. So I've done all sorts of different kind of weird jobs over the years, and I encourage you younger folk in here to always take the detour. When I write a book, when I start out writing a book, I start with these ideas, with these 5 points maybe, I start with that, and I start writing, and then I start building out my outline, and I have an ending in mind and everything, and I work on a very meticulous outline at a certain point. My new book that I'm almost done with writing has 67 points in its outline. So it's a lot of pretty. Now, the thing is, I use an outline to help me not have writer's block, because I have no excuses not to write. Writer's block just means you don't know what to write next. I just have to look at my outline and say, write something. Even if it's not going to be in my book, as long as I'm writing something, I'm solving something, right? If I'm not writing anything, I'm not solving anything. So you have to write through the problem. So I always have an outline, but I always am flexible and will change the outline or modify the outline if something happens, if my character has a detour. In How Evan Broke His Head and Other Secrets, early on in the book, it's a guy in a rock band, you know, he's a guitarist in a rock band. They go into the studio and they're cutting a demo, and they go into the studio, and my main character, Evan, sees there's this kind of quasi-famous sound engineer in the studio, and no one's ever worked with, these guys are like intimidated. It's a woman, and she does the Rolling Stones and stuff like that, and everyone's kind of intimidated by her. And then I'm writing the scene, and Evan, my main character, falls in love with her. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. It's not a love story. I had this whole outline about how it was going to go. I had to change that. I got to throw it away. Because they're telling me something. The characters did something, and it's their book, not my book. I just take notes. The characters do stuff. And when you see a book that you don't buy what happened in the book, that's because the writer tried to do something. Writers shouldn't try to do something. That's deus ex machina, another important term that you learned from your English class. Deus ex machina. God in the machine. God in the machine. We use it now to mean a contrivance when the author does something to make an ending happen. It comes from the old days of Greek theater, when they didn't have Xboxes and iPads in the old days. So everybody went to the theater and they hung out there all day. They're cooking food in the pit, and they're like hanging out. And they'd have a play and it would go on and on and on and on. They're like, well, we got to end this now. Okay, let's have God come in and fix everything. And so they invented a little winch, and they rolled it out and they lowered the guy down on a rope. God in the machine. It means a contrivance. That's how we use it now in our literary terms. And it's what happens when a writer tries to force something to happen in a book that is against the nature of the plot or the characters. We have to be true. If we screwed up, then we have to go back and fix it. A plot is ballistic in nature. I'm teaching a regular English class here. A plot is ballistic in nature. It is not computer guided. It isn't. You know, ballistic missiles, the old days, ICBMs, buzz bombs. A ballistic missile has one launch, and then it goes. Then you know wherever you set it to launch, you don't control it in the air. Not like Patriot missiles where you're driving it with a joystick. In the old days, ballistic missile, you launch it, and if you set the coordinates wrong, sorry, can't get that one back, right? That's the same thing with a plot. When I have a book and someone says, I have my beta readers look at it, and they say, oh, there's a thing on page 320 that really bugged me, and you should fix that. How you should fix it is you take 320 and then you do. And I'm like, no, thank you for showing me where the soft spot is. That's all I needed from you. Now I have to go take a look at it and see why didn't my reader get what I wanted my reader to get on page 320. It's not because something's wrong on page 320. It's because something is wrong on page 104. That I set something up here that I thought was set my coordinates and thought the bomb was going to land here. But it didn't. I was off. I gave false expectations or wrong expectations or something so that the reader put together a different set of coordinates and it ended up here, right? So my job now is not to drag this down and push it down so that, I have to go fix what I did here. So this is something I worked with, I kind of crystallized with me when I was doing The Art of Racing in the Rain. I was writing, we were getting ready to send it out to the editors and everything. It was a lot of pressure on me. It goes out to all the editors at once, and then hopefully there's action and you get an auction and all that kind of stuff. And so the night before it was going to go out, my agent called me up and he said, I just noticed this. There's this thing in this chapter right here, and it's wrong. You have to stay up all night and rewrite that chapter to make it work. And I said, let me think about it. And I went home and I talked it over with my wife. And she's like, what are you going to do? How are you going to fix that? How are you going to do it? And I said, that chapter is right. The problem is that he's reading it incorrectly, or he's reading it for him correctly, but he's not getting what I want him to get out of it, because 4 chapters earlier I set that up, so I'm going to rewrite that chapter instead. So I rewrote that chapter and I sent it back to my agent. I said, now start earlier, get a running start at this, and don't just start on the chapter that you told me to fix. Start a few chapters. And so he did, and he went through it and he was like, oh wow, that was great, you totally fixed that chapter. I said, I didn't even touch that chapter. I touched a different chapter that made that chapter work. It's all cause and effect, it's all that kind of stuff. Everything has ripples. So anyway, you tell me how long you want me to go, because you know me.
Just a minute. Did you base any of your characters off anybody you knew, or it was all completely fiction?
Did I base any characters on anyone I know? You mean are the evil twins my in-laws?
No, I did not ask that.
No, they are not. And don't worry, my mother-in-law did ask me that question too. A writer is a good thief. I listen, I go around and I see other people and what they're doing in their lives and listen to how they say things and watch how they solve problems and stuff like that. And then I try and co-opt it and morph it into something that I can use. So no, nothing directly one-to-one. Well, I should take that back. There is one character in The Art of Racing in the Rain who is an actual person. The character of Don Kitch, the driving coach. Don Kitch is a real guy and at Pacific Raceways. And he taught me how to drive. I got my racing license by taking his class. And at that class, he handed out a little flyer that he had written up, because if you're going to race in the Northwest, you better get used to driving in the wet weather. So he had handed out a pamphlet of tips that he wrote, and he called it The Art of Racing in the Rain. So I stole the title from him. And then I wrote him in the book. I wrote him in as a character, because I thought, there's a guy just like Don Kitch in the book. And then as I was going, I was like, it's kind of cool that it's Don Kitch in the book. And so when I was done, I called him up and I said, is it okay if I make you a character in the book? And he said, well, I'd have to see it first. So I'm glad he trusts me. But he actually was quite flattered, and it's a lot of fun. And now when he goes racing and stuff, he's kind of famous. Because the one place where people recognize me is at a racetrack. So, which is kind of amusing. But anyway, look, you guys have been great. I'll let you go. Thank you so much for having me out, and I'm going to go into the back and sign any books you'd like me to sign and hang out.
Hey,
Thanks.
that's what I was going to